important to share that we have solidarity with Native and Indigenous people who may not count their history as part of ethnic studies, but it's important that we acknowledge that we have solidarity with Indigenous and Native peoples throughout the world and in the United States. With that being said, we would like to pass the opening and grounding to Monkwe Ndosi.
Thank you, Jonathan. Welcome, everyone. So I just am here to give us a little bit of moment of reflection and grounding as we start to be together. I may ask you to lower or close your eyes. If you need to continue to look at the screen for interpretation, I invite you to, while you're doing it, still to be giving your attention inward, to be practicing our observer within us so that we can see ourselves. My name is Monkwe. I'm a cultural worker. I've been working, born and raised in the land where the waters reflect the skies. And I've been working in the Twin Cities in arts and transformative activism communities for the last 30 years. And I'm also studying work on trauma and on grounding ourselves in our goodness and our nourishment and our just rightness. So in this moment, in this morning, I want to invite you to feel your edges, to notice where your feet or your body meets the ground, where your skin meets your clothing, and noticing the ground, noticing that the earth where we stand will always be here for us. It will never go away. I invite you to bring your attention to your breath, just to notice, not to change, and to notice how deeply you're breathing. Where is your breathing coming from? Where does your body ask for breath? In this moment, I also invite you to just notice any thoughts or messages or feelings that are showing up. To say thank you to them. And to let them be, not to attach ourselves to them, but just to notice what they are, to observe. Say thank you to our mind for working hard to fix things or take care of ourselves, to figure out the next best way forward. In this moment, in a way that is, in any way that's helpful, useful to you, I would invite you to notice, just notice the sensations in your body. If that is not a comfortable thing, I encourage you to notice your hands. And everyone, in fact, notice your hands. Notice any part of your hands that may be talking to you. That talk may be in temperature, in the ache, in the lightness, in the twist, in the tightness. Is there any other place on your body that is speaking to you a little and wants a little bit of attention? If so, I invite you to move or to rub your hands and bring your hands to that part of your body to just be. Let your body tell you what it's asking for, knowing that our intelligence is throughout our body and that we have information to learn to become as fully present, as fully magnanimous as we can be. In this moment, I also would like to invite you to remember what stimulated or inspired you to want to get involved in ethnic studies, and to bring some of that moment or some of that period into your memory. And see if you can find a person who stimulated, spurred you into wanting this, into the desire for this to exist. Excuse my neighbor dogs. They're quite active. Or who inspired you to be involved in something like this. And it might be a negative involvement. Sometimes we get inspired by stuff that isn't working. Or it could be a positive, a drawing force toward it, someone who you wanted to emulate. And either way, I invite you to, in your own self, find someone to dedicate this time to remember why you're here, and to remember why the road is worth walking. The road is worth staying in for a long time. And the road is worth making collaboration, comradeship, and connection, because we do this better together. And I'll just leave with, thank you for your time, with a short song. One of the things that I do is sing. And this I've learned from others, but where I saw it most used most recently has been with the Peace Poets and the Poor People's Campaign. And it's, the song goes, I have not come here alone, carry my people in my bones. I have not come here alone. And if you listen, you can hear them in my soul. I have not come here alone. Carry my people in my bones. I have not come here alone. And if you see me, you can see it in my soul. If you listen, you can hear them in my soul. And when you see me, you can see it in my soul. Thank you so much for having me. I'm inspired to be here. And thank you all for your dedication.
Thank you, Manque. That blessing, we're going to pass it off to Madeline to read our community care statement today.
Good morning, beautiful people. I'm going to share this so you can read along if you so wish. We adopted these community norms from the Free Minds, Free People conference that we helped organize this past summer. Education for Liberation Minnesota strives to be a community of care. We believe that at the center of liberation is radical love for each other and ourselves. That love pushes us to try to create a better world. Because of that, we are working to minimize the amount of harm that occurs in our spaces. White supremacy, misogyny, ableism, classism, homophobia, and transphobia exist everywhere, even in radical spaces. They are some of the threads of which normative society is woven, and it is so hard to untangle them. If you are called out for perpetuating any of these things, please understand that it is not because you are unimportant or we wish to exclude you. Instead, we are trying to demonstrate compassion and care and do the least amount of harm toward people in our communities, particularly those with marginalized identities. We recognize that we are all entrenched in these systems of oppression and all have work to do. We hold everyone to be accountable for their participation within these systems of oppression. We ask everyone to challenge themselves and to fight against it in these spaces. If you enact displays of power and oppression, we will talk to you. We invite you to educate yourself and to relearn how to interact with others in the space without enacting harm. If you cannot or are unwilling to address it, we will ask you to leave. We need both love and rage in every part of our lives to carry on dismantling oppression. Both can be a part of a radical resistance to the destructive world that we live in today. If we put in the effort to truly learn from and care about each other, we seek to forge stronger bonds and to create a community that we can rely on, rather than systems of violence. Being accountable to each other is a good way to start. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Madeline, for sharing the community norms. Also, thanks again, Marquay, for your art. That is an example of ethnic studies, art in ethnic studies right there. So I want to make sure that I say that almost everything that you see us do today is can be used within ethnic studies, and I think that's important to note. With that being said, I would like to pass the mic on to Dr. Rose Brewer. She will be sharing a brief framing and history of ethnic studies. You're muted, Dr. Brewer.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Good morning once again. I am so moved by being here this morning, knowing the time, work, energy, and political will that has gone in to making this day possible, and the days that will follow as we move this project along. Was honored to be a part of the organizing that took place in the Twin Cities Free Minds, Free People's Conference, bringing over 1,000 people here from all across the country and indeed the world. And thrilled to know that the work continues through the Education for Liberation Network. In this period of Rise Up, in the moment of the Floyd Rebellion, I'm reminded once again of the power of youth resistance in catalyzing ethnic studies, and in particular, from my own field, Black studies. The work of the young people who are here today, their continuing assertion to see themselves in our history, cultures, teaching, and knowledges guide our work today. This idea of relevant and engaged learning is rooted in the historic theory and practice of Black ethnic studies. Before it became trendy for universities to encourage student engagement, the militant spirit of ethnic studies struggles of the late 1960s period, placed in community engagement, made the heart and theory and soul of the field a dynamic between community and schools. I will lift up a slender piece of that history, the past 50 years or so, with the focus on Black studies in particular, but with an eye on ethnic studies broadly. And we all know this is hundreds of years struggle. It didn't begin with 1960 or 50, but ever since the forcible removal of the Dakota from these lands, ever since the enshackling of African peoples, the knowledges and the practices of all these people have informed our sense of who we are and of the ethnic studies enterprise. But it is quite true that in the last 60 or so years, from the 1950s to the 1980s, largely through resistances, and in this instance, Black resistance, from the bottom up, the legal order of racial apartheid, segregation was dismantled. Legislation was passed, 64 Civil Rights Act and the 65 Voting Rights Act, enfranchising African Americans because of the blood, sweat, tears, and political resistance of everyday people. Black folk, the John Lewis's, Septima Clarks, Ella Bakers, Malcolm X's, Martin Luther King's, and countless unnamed others. However, white supremacy was not fundamentally transformed, and large-scale white backlash to educational rights was mounted in the wake of the 54 Brown v. Board decision and continues today. For those of us who have been involved with ethnic studies, the teaching and its practice, the legacy of the 1960s and the Black Studies movement informs our commitments. We at the University of Minnesota commemorated the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the department in 1969 through student protest and resistance. At the center of that movement was asserting the need for study and struggle. The first Black Studies programs nationally involved overt struggle with the state and police. Nonetheless, as Black studies scholars point out, what is less focused on is the intellectual activist history which runs through the struggles of the period. These intellectual demands shape the field, ethnic studies traditions, and all that we profess to be about today. The student and faculty activists of the time understood that racism could not be confronted strictly in the halls of academia. Indeed, one of the most important concepts in the general student movement, and especially in the Black student movement of the time, was relevance. Relevance in K through 12, relevance in all of its dimensions, relevance in academic knowledge. Dr. Nathan Hare, the chair of the first Black Studies program at San Francisco State University, called it education which would contribute to solving the problems of the race by producing persons capable of solving problems of a contagious American society. To do this would not make education more or less, but certainly make it transformational. This was discussed, also struggled for at San Francisco State and hundreds of other universities and colleges and high schools and middle schools and elementary schools, often with a good deal of support from communities. The connection to community was central to the San Francisco State struggle. Students established a Black Arts and Culture series in the experimental college there. And because of San Francisco State's commitment, became involved in community work. This and other community engaged activities signal the social commitment of ethnic studies. We know indeed that the historic and guiding principle of ethnic studies is thinking and acting in deep relationality with our peoples. It means, in fact, students through action become engaged in observation, learning, and research, working with communities on a collaborative basis to create a useful set of possibilities. This cannot be done without critical interrogation of the meaning of the deep history of this country. Every institution in the US is structured under racial capitalism, economy, polity, education, health. Because of this deeply rooted racial injustice, life chances are fundamentally different for BIPOC people. Race and racism, white supremacism are still very much a part of the geographies of space and place in this society. Geographic apartheid remains alive and well. This means that people may come together in public space to some degree, but largely we live separate lives, sadly. Indeed, despite the talk of a colorblind society, race matters and remains deeply rooted in the 21st century US. Today, as you know, there's a 21st century backlash against racial injustice. There is the commitment in some circles to abject poverty and to, as we witnessed here in the Twin Cities, murder. So our project, our commitment, our need to teaching ethnic studies is greater than ever. It means opening up a space for students to see systems and power at work. It means preparing all of us to critically interrogate the so-called post-racial. It means preparing us to go behind the appearance of things and look at its essence, our essence, this society's essences, thus to dismantle that which has been so horribly wrong. I have a couple of more minutes and a lot more to say, but I will, I guess, ask us to reflect on the colonization of our peoples and realize in this neo-colonial internalized form, we have to struggle both externally and internally. The colonization of our intellectual lives is a further expression of the work that we must do in ethnic studies. Finally, let's come full circle, sounding the note of study and struggle. The founding vision of ethnic studies is relevant here. There was a deep call for decolonizing social research and seizing knowledge channels to further our liberation and the life of all peoples in this country. We know that the right-wing educational attack today confronts directly this commitment, the historic struggles and the contemporary struggles of our people. These are attacks on our ability to tell our stories, to speak our truths, and to transform the curriculum regarding the history of these United States. We know that our work is cut out for us. We know that this is what we must do in the coming period. The current period demands that we continue this history and this legacy. In short, during these chilling times, we are stronger together than we ever will be apart. While those of us in ethnic studies have chastised and railed against conservatives, in fact, in liberal Minnesota, our work must be done. Our practice must be rooted in a strong sense of our cultures, political economic realities, the logic of genders and history. Our history means we must fight for ethnic studies in the state, in the nation, globally, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brewer. For those that would like to react, there's reactions. I see hand claps, fingers, the thumbs up. That's cool. Thank you, Dr. Brewer. I appreciate that. We appreciate that. So now to continue on with our agenda, we would like to take a 5-minute break. 5-minute stretch break, 5-minute bathroom break, just to, do what we need to do for 5 minutes. We will continue on at 10:45. All right.
All right, everybody. We're coming back now. Yeah, thank you to everyone who's already presented, who's spoken, who had something. It's such a blessing. We got to take so much time this morning to start with grounding ourselves, looking at our spirits and our bodies, thanking the ancestors that all brought us here today, and imagining the future that I don't even have a word for it, but we're setting out so much positive energy in the future right now. We kick it off next in the next phase of our morning with Leo and Anindita from the Youth Ethnic Studies Coalition to present right now. Pass it off to y'all.
Hi, I'm Anindita. I'm representing the Youth Ethnic Studies Coalition along with Leo Orion. And we have a short video that we made to show you all, to kind of talk a little bit about our work and who we are. So Leo, if you have anything else to say, otherwise we can play the video.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna quick introduce myself real quick. Sorry, I was on mute and I didn't realize it. My name is Leo and I'm presenting with Amandita for the Youth Ethnic Studies Coalition, but I'm also a part of Youth Rock, and I use my pronouns are he and this.
Studies is important to me because I believe that representation matters. If students see themselves more in the class material, then they will more likely be able to engage.
In many of my social studies classes, the curriculum was largely focused on the history of white people in Europe and North America. And although I am represented in this history, many BIPOC students are not.
Back in my freshman year of high school, I took ethnic studies, and thankfully for that, I was able to learn how to love myself by learning about my background, my ancestors, and so on.
What is one word that describes what ethnic studies means to you? Empower.
Thank you guys for watching that. We have time for questions if anybody has any.
And I can also share how you all and your loved ones can participate. So we would so we're still looking for videos from youth to build out this video and possibly even create a series of videos that we share through our social media accounts. I will share the link for that has the instructions. There's a waiver, and it will have where you can either email us or where you can put the videos into a folder. And you can answer any of the questions that are given in the document as well.
All right.
But yeah, any questions? We're here to answer.
Hi, I had a question about how do kids get involved with you, with your various organizations? I see you posted the websites, but specifically to what you guys are doing.
We have open meetings every week or so. We're trying to nail down a set time as we've had new people join the group. But anybody that wants to join, let me know in the chat, and I can share that with Clara King, who organizes and facilitates most of our meetings. But yeah, most of what we're doing right now is trying to organize for this video, and then also which our goal is for public school systems to see this video and to help start getting some action towards ethnic studies and MPS and SPPS.
And then where are you guys like organized? Where are you coming out of? I'm not very familiar with the youth ethnic studies. Is it through McAllister, the U, or, I mean?
No, it's a coalition of groups. So some of the groups you saw in the video.
Gotcha.
I'm with Youth Rock. Amandita is with SEEB, which is through so it's a loose coalition of folks.
Gotcha. No, that makes more sense now. Thanks. And then what is the age group? How old do you have to be to start? Because I teach middle school.
Anybody is welcome to join. And it's all we just started this during the time of COVID. So it's so far just been via Zoom. But hopefully if things start to return to like some sense of normalcy, we can like have a location. But for now, it's just a couple different groups like Youth Rock, the Student Engagement and Advancement Board, SEEB, which is where I'm from, Yamen, Unidos, and Asian American Organizing Project, AAOP. So I can't speak to how to get involved in each of those individual organizations, but as far as SEEB goes, that's something you can apply to be part of as a St. Paul Public School student.
Yeah, the coalition itself is, there's no real requirements for joining, but for the video we would like to have specifically youth, and we define youth as elementary through college.
Okay. Well, I'm on the north side, so I'll probably just hit up my girl over at Youth Rock then.
Abby?
So Leo, you'll probably see me. Yep.
Yeah.
We'll probably see me around again.
Yeah.
All right, I'm done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
For questions, and Anita, I'm sorry, not Anita, Anadita and Leo, thank you for your presentations. We truly appreciate it. And you know, some of those questions makes me want to make sure to stress that this event is for recruiting for for EdLib, Education Liberation Minnesota. This is to build a network of mentor and mentees. This event, this kickoff event, should be considered as the beginning, all right? So that is important to know. To continue on with our agenda, I would like to welcome our presenters. We have 4 presenters. They will give a brief presentation about ethnic studies in classroom and community spaces. First, we'll have Dr. Meredith McCoy, then Dr. Jimmy Patino, and Dr. Yuichiro, I was almost going to say Yuich, but Dr. Yuichiro Onishi, and then Peng Yang toward the end. Each presenter will have 5 to 7 minutes. I will, at the 7-minute mark, I will then welcome the other presenter to kind of facilitate and help move things along. But welcome, and please introduce yourselves to the group, the network, as you begin your presentation. We'll start off with Meredith, Dr. McCoy. Thank you.
Bonjour, and Maganidok, Meredith McCoy, and Dishnakas, Jajal Knendodum. Nokamanji Mekanakwajuka, Indonji Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Gai Indao Gakabakang. Hi, everyone. My name is Meredith McCoy. I am, my family is from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians. Our territories are in what is currently understood as North Central North Dakota. I grew up in North Carolina, and I'm so grateful now to be living in Gakabakang in what we understand as, thank you for the land acknowledgement, as Dakota homelands, and also as the homelands of Ojibwe people in parts further north from us. Today I want to just talk with you briefly about one way of doing Indigenous studies that's a sort of a values-driven understanding of Indigenous studies that's based on my understanding of how I teach as an Anishinaabeg. So this is going to be drawing from a piece that I co-wrote with some other Indigenous and non-Indigenous critical social studies scholars. I'm a former middle school teacher. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade social studies, English language arts, and Spanish. And I'm so excited to just be able to learn here with you today. And before I proceed, I just want to say what a blessing it's been to hear from the other speakers and to see this movement proceeding across generations. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing. Before I begin, it's important to me, as always, to ground myself in the people who got me where I am. This is something that you may be familiar with in terms of just thinking about ethnic studies as a practice of relationality. So I come from a family of educators. Both my parents and my grandparents are all educators. My great-grandparents here in the bottom left-hand corner, Christine, Josephine Villeneuve, and Gideon Nicholas, they both attended federal Indian boarding schools at Wapton and at Fort Totten. And the reason that I bring them particularly into this space with us today is because the kind of violent assimilationist curriculum to which they were subjected as students is exactly what we're continuing to fight against. Those things are not done. Obviously, all of us who are on this call today know that. And so I just want to hold them up as a reminder of why I'm in this fight, and as to just encourage us all to think about, as Dr. Brewer brought up, who are those people who keep us motivated to be doing this work. The Turtle Island Social Studies Collective is a cohort of Leilani Subsalian, who's an Alutiiq scholar at the University of Oregon, Lakota Pachedli, she's a Citizen Band Potawatomi community-based researcher who currently is the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer at Gun Lake in Michigan, and Sarah Shear, who's a settler scholar at the University of Washington, Bothell. And together we developed this idea around a unit plan that would help us to think through centering Indigenous women in the classroom, not as people to just learn about in sort of a decontextualized historical way, but as a way to help students think about the lessons we can learn from these change makers and how we can adopt that as inspiration for our own community-based practice. In this, there are some kind of core principles or core vocabulary that I think Indigenous studies brings that are really important to think through with students. First, this idea of the land, right? That for us as Indigenous peoples, we understand ourselves as embedded in networks of relationality with the land. That means with the lands, with waters, with atmospheres, and with our plant and animal relations, the plant and animal nations. And so as we think about any understanding of ourselves as doing educational work, we have to remember that it has to be embedded in our reciprocal relations with those plant and animal and land and water and atmospheric relatives. Land also gives us an opportunity to talk about engaging in that sort of critical interrogation of colonialism. So thinking about the relationship of land to treaties, to violent histories of dispossession and of deceit. Moving into colonization, that is, for me as somebody who thinks about Indigenous studies, is such a critical thing for us to help students understand as an ongoing process, not as something embedded in the past, but as, of course, a settler colonial project that is ongoing and continues to dispossess Indigenous peoples of our right to be responsible to our human and more than human relations. And that sort of brings me to tribal sovereignty. And so, we often in our standards, we see local, state, and federal governance, but rarely is tribal sovereignty included in one of those levels of governance. So one of the critical interventions we can make in bringing Indigenous studies into the conversation is remembering that legally Indigenous nations have a legal authority that is equal to and not lesser than that of the states. So if we see places where Indigenous sovereignty is being excluded from the curriculum, that's a place where we really have to make an active intervention and say Indigenous governance is inherent and it's ongoing. And lastly, when teachers are looking for Indigenous related resources in the classroom, often what they find, particularly if we go to places like Teachers Pay Teachers, are sort of stereotypical arts and culture activities that don't actually get at these embedded networks of relationality or at issues of Indigenous governance. So wanting to think about ways that we can teach that maintain sort of a relation to the present and foreground Indigenous sovereignty and these ideas of relationality. So I'm going to make sure that a copy of the actual lesson plan is available for those of you who want it, but just at a very high level. The idea here was to create a lesson plan where students could really think through in what ways have Indigenous women been change makers in their communities, but also more broadly in their professions, in the nation states that are occupying their territories, and what can we learn from them in terms of finding ways to be change makers in our own communities. So we think of this as for primarily grades 3 through 5, rolling out over probably a couple of weeks, although certainly this should be embedded in the curriculum throughout the year. And so pulling in resources like Joan Robertson's The Water Walker, and thinking about Indigenous women change makers as being grounded in their territories and in their nations as they're advocating on these particular issues. So all of this in this lesson plan is about thinking through what LaDonna Harris, who's a Comanche leader, has talked about as the 4 R's. And so these would be sort of respect, so understanding that we have to be in these networks of relationality and responsibility with each other as we treat each other with that kind of love and respect, recognizing our kinship networks each with the other, understanding our responsibilities to do this work. And then I just want us to maybe sit with, as a closing question, what would it mean if one of our actual learning objectives for our students were to conceive of their own learning through these values? So what would it mean if students had a learning objective that said, I'm going to be able to respond to my learning by engaging in networks of redistribution and reciprocity, giving back for the learning that I'm receiving, recognizing that that learning was given to me as a gift, and that I then have now a responsibility to do something with it constructive for my community. I'll stop there, and just a shout out here to the other members of the collective. And Miigwech Bisandawe, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Dr. McCoy. We truly appreciate your presentation. And we have to understand that this is a Zoom event, and we're not trying to keep everyone here longer than the allotted time, but we do need to recognize that the presentations and experiences that are being shared by our presenters is just an example of what you would get as in the mentor-mentee arrangement within EdLib Minnesota. So just keep that in mind. This is a small example of what you would be getting from the presentations. Also, for the rest of the speakers, we do have an interpreter, and so if you could just slow it down just a little as you present. But next, we would like to welcome Dr. Jimmy Patino, and thanks for presenting.
Good morning. Thank you. let me attempt to share my screen here, and an image should come up. Okay, do we see these folks marching? Great. Amazing. Yeah, I want to begin. Thank you, Dr. McCoy, for, I like the way you framed it by evoking your ancestor, the notion of violent assimilationist education. I think first and foremost, ethnic studies is in a context of struggle, and that, I think, defines that in a particular kind of way. I consider my first ethnic studies mentors. I'm invoking my grandmother's name, Julia Gutierrez Patiño. She didn't call it ethnic studies, but the knowledge she shared with me as a Mexican woman, as a mother, as a worker, et cetera, in her kitchen, I think was my first experience with ethnic studies, and I came to recall that as I was called to teach and become an ethnic studies practitioner. So thank you for that. And thank you to the, particularly Sarah Garten and the Education Liberation crew here for creating this space. I'm appreciative of the care and the deliberate practice putting into place and creating the space. So, and I think it evokes another, as we maintain this discussion of what is ethnic studies and how do we do it. One key tenet is collaborative, is collectivity, is a community of accountability and support, right? And I think that's what we're trying to evoke here, and the way that I've learned and tried to practice ethnic studies. So I join on as a mentor, as a comrade, and as we put into practice this set of ideas and this tradition, right? A little more about myself. I came to Minnesota in 2011 to join the Department of Chicano and Latino Studies at the University of Minnesota, where I'm now an associate professor there. Through collaboration with my comrade and colleague, Yui Chonishi, who you'll hear from shortly, and Keith Mays in Black Studies, one of the things I was able to engage in practice over the past several years is to serve as a mentor and collaborator with K through 12 teachers in a number of settings throughout the Twin Cities on how to implement ethnic studies, particularly Latinx history, and into their curriculum, into whatever kind of courses or engagement with their students and their communities that they're attempting to do. So I've done that over the past 4 or 5 years, and it's been very generative. And so again, I'll think about and try to demonstrate a little bit like what a kind of ethnic studies perspective on the current moment, why this is so significant right now, which I think we're all feeling and experiencing and trying to process and articulate. But the kinds of spaces and practices of ethnic studies as educators, of course, is vital. As we note, as we sit in the wake of the social inequalities embedded in this moment, right, in the pandemic, the sorts of race, class, and gender inequalities that are emerging from this moment, the kind of practices are being exposed. Of course, you know, the police murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, and the uprisings that happened in many of our own neighborhoods. You know, I would insist on adding to that the struggles of indigenous nations, from Standing Rock to some of the huge court cases that have just passed in terms of the struggle for land and sovereignty, not to mention, again, the disproportionate experience with the pandemic, struggles with femicide and sex trafficking, and their own struggles with police violence and whatnot. And finally, of course, it's been a year since the El Paso massacre, that the dialogue and memory of that in the mainstream dominant media has attempted to, not surprisingly, as a Chicano studies scholar, be buried and put aside. So to evoke the memory of that moment where the perpetrator, directly referenced the attempt to kill Mexicans as his goal, right? And to put that in a broader context in which, mostly Mexican and Central American families are being separated by a federal police force that is stationed at the US border, but that operates across the country. And that's led to the caging of children and whatnot. We're still in these contexts, right? And so ethnic studies as a tradition to engage this moment, I think evokes me to ask a few things. I mean, one, reading about the El Paso massacre this morning, the perpetrator in that moment evoked another perpetrator in New Zealand that attacked so-called folks of color, and was inspired by that. And this perpetrator labeled these folks as foreigners, and of course was from a white settler community. So one question I have is to interrogate this process in which white settler communities come to see themselves as native or indigenous somehow, and to see others as foreign and whatnot. Like that's a question that I want to evoke thinking about this morning. And more broadly, what happens when we connect all those things together, all those moments of violence, racialized violence among differently racialized communities? What happens if we put them in dialogue with each other, try to understand them in a way that they're connected with one another, and hopefully lead us to, and this is the third kind of question I think ethnic studies might evoke, is what are the solutions that we're discussing right now? What are new visions coming from those communities who are suffering the brunt of this continued practice of colonization and whatnot? So those are the kind of questions I think ethnic studies would evoke in this moment. To wrap up, I want to turn as an example of some of the primary documents. As a historian, to answer those kinds of questions, I look into history and look into certain moments in history. And one thing I've been working on is an analysis of the Brown Berets in St. Paul, the St. Paul chapter of the Brown Berets. So if you'll just take a moment to look at this image from 1972, the Mexican Celebration Parade in downtown St. Paul, right? This isn't downtown Los Angeles or downtown San Antonio or Mexico City. This is downtown St. Paul, right? Which, as someone from Texas, wow, there's a Chicano Studies department in Minnesota. There were Brown Berets in Minnesota. That was my first kind of experience with that. And so these are the kind of primary sources. This image, I think, says so much. And feel free, or I'd love to hear in the chat, maybe a couple of words or thoughts that come to your mind when you see this image. I'm going to switch to a similar image here of them again. Yeah, what kind of things might come to mind? What kind of questions might come to mind when you see these images? And I'm trying to see your chats here. I'm still figuring out Zoom a bit, as maybe we all are. Let's see. Okay, yeah, pride, a deep understanding of self-worth and self-value. Right, a very powerful image that I think evokes a lot of strength, right? And again, to wrap, I know I'm running out of time here. I have an image of, so this was, if you could briefly look at the first part, this was an opinion, in the opinion column in a popular newspaper at the time. I wonder about the organization called Brown Berets, and that's been formed on the Lower West Side of St. Paul. A lot of people down here are scared of the group because they don't know what its purpose is, right? So this was the context too. So we use these archival sources among many others, right? To make sense of this. How did the dominant society see these folks? This demonstrates how they were seen as a threat, right? By many people. The image itself gives us insight into how they evoked strength, how they were taking up space, demonstrating organization in a community that was seen as transient and and unengaged with the mainstream life in Minnesota, right? So these are a few things that kind of come up, and I'll wrap up there and pass up to my colleague. Thank you.
Thank you again for your presentation, Dr. Coutinho. It's great to see the chat, everyone sharing their comments and thoughts over on the chat. Please continue to do so as the presentations continue. Next up, we will have Dr. Yuichiro Onishi. Welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, everybody. See if I can do this as well. Share my screen. Can you all see this? That's great. Thank you again. This is my name is Yuich. I teach at the U as well, at the Department of African American Studies and also Asian American Studies. I just stepped in as chair of the Department of African American Studies. And I just really want to thank you all, the organizers, helping us all to find grounding in every possible way to this land, to our mind and our sort of relationships. And I've never been in a space like this, and it's really a revelatory experience. I think I've been thoroughly institutionalized. So meetings don't run like this. So it's really great to be part of this dialogue. I just want to maybe just go straight into my presentation. I do want to make it quite short. But before I start, I want to give where credit is due. I'm from Japan originally, came when I was 12, been here for a long time now. Went through schooling during the Reagan years, fairly completely disconnected from lived experiences of the people. Very privileged, New York in the suburbs and in Chicago. And my political sort of education really started at college. I went to Macalester, and then continued through grad school. And I went to the U, did my PhD in history. Rose Brewer really was one of my teachers. I had many teachers, and she just assigned tremendous books, and I just evolved them all and helped shape my political consciousness and specifically internationalist perspective. Really helped me become internationalist, and in part that came through education in the sort of left literature, but specifically Black radicalism and internationalism. So anyway, I don't know if I can do justice here, but I want to start by really focusing on just this particular prompt that was given to me, which is to make distinction between ethnic studies lens and social justice lens. And I wanted to see if I can do this, but I want to do that. And in part, what I want to do, the objective is to really show the problem of the whiteness of social justice lens, and to really kind of suggest that we make this paradigm shift toward ethnic studies lens. And I think that could be defined in different ways, but I want to do that by using Abraham Lincoln as a case study, and to go back to the age of emancipation in the mid 19th century, the US Civil War, momentous occasion in the history of the modern world. Obviously, this was a moment in which the people, the enslaved masses, overthrew chattel slavery. W.E.B. Du Bois would talk about this particular moment in terms of the general strike. It is greatest uncompensated seizure of property by the enslaved. It's a clear case drama, a case of Black self-emancipation. But to narrate that perspective and then to actually render it and deliver it in classroom, I do think that requires us to really unpack in this particular lesson, Lincoln as a problem. And I think that the social justice lens maybe has sort of made that move to say that the Lincoln was no emancipator. And just let me see if I can do this. Maybe it doesn't. Yeah, there we go. That he really hardly cared about the sort of total liberation, or really didn't care about crafting a social policy that would free Black people and to give them access to basic human needs, starting with access to land or to education and political rights and so forth. And this is just a list of things that Lincoln actually meditated and considered as the sectional conflicts intensify: gradual emancipation, compensated emancipation, basically compensating the slave owners, colonization plans, and then ultimately, again, the Emancipation Proclamation issued on January 1st, 1863 was regarded as a military measure, not a social policy at all, designed to fundamentally transform society, specifically the system of racial capitalism, the very mechanism of policing, managing, inequality based on system of inequality based on race and class. It was not about dignity of labor. I'm sorry, this is not the slide that I'm supposed to look at. So from that, so I think that social justice lens goes there and to trouble, perhaps, trouble the Lincoln, and to categorically say that he was no emancipator. But I think that what lurks behind the social justice lens, and what I'm calling the whiteness of social justice lens, is that the white gaze is rendered uninterrogated. What I mean by that is that oftentimes, in the context of learning, people don't really go further to actually critique white abolitionism as a structure of knowledge. So it's okay to criticize Lincoln. Yes, we can do that. But I think that we would do well to go further to really contest the white conception of the white knowledge structure of abolitionism. So oftentimes we talk about abolitionist movement. So people like William and Lloyd Garrison and his comrades would be sort of named alongside, Frederick Douglass and so forth, and Sojourner Truth and many others. These white abolitionists, played a catalyst, were their catalyst, producing pamphlets and trying to sort of, politicize the masses. But oftentimes these white abolitionists wrote the narratives, pamphlets, in the voice of Black subjects. And there's this one particular primary source that I always use in my college course, which is a scene of the auction block. And it's written by, again, the white abolitionists in service of, activating the abolitionist movement, the overthrow of chattel slavery. Well, what really kind of makes this particular document uneasy is that the structure of the narrative essentially produced this type of visual representation of Black experience. Pretty static, that they are in this kind of condition of oppressive situation, chained and so forth. And so I always ask this question: does the image best capture the experience of enslaved to the students? Is there something wrong with this representation? What's the merit of this image? What's been emphasized? What's been emphasized is the condemnation of Black people, the dehumanization. It is meant to elicit pity as well as empathy, and then possibly some form of political collective action from the masses to overthrow. But there's a great deal of sort of flattening that goes into the construction of image like this. And so the white abolitionists continuously perpetuate it. And this is another emblem, the Josiah Wedgwood, very famous emblem for the abolitionist movement. Am I not a man? and a brother. And to contest this type of sort of liberal sentiments, progressive sentiments, which is really meant to restore personhood, which was been taken away from Black people through chattel slavery. I present different perspectives rather than just simply focus on what was done to them. So that's the structure of oppression. We really have to talk about what did Black people do with what was done to them. So that's a question of agency. And oftentimes I really feel like the social justice lens maybe lends itself to merely talking about what was done to them. I may be wrong, been away from really K through stuff, but I think that we cannot continuously perpetuate this type of structure of knowledge. And so I introduce a counterpoint, specifically Paul Robeson, because I'm using this particular document, which is a scene of auction block. It's a slave narrative, it's an abolitionist text. And Paul Robeson's spirituals are incredible, no more auction block for me. And I ask students as we go through these texts and to think about the difference between Robeson's rendition of Black life and the white abolitionist narrative of Black life, and to really contest the sort of liberal conception of the reconstitution of personhood. The Black conception of personhood, Black conception of life was sharply different, particularly coming from the enslaved people. And that really came to fruition in for a short period of time in Reconstruction period. And I go on and talk about how Black people in Richmond, for instance, approach voting rights as not an individual possession, but collective possession. Not an individual possession. That's a very liberal conception, that you own right and you exercise it and show responsibility and show ethical obligations and moral obligations. But if you look at Reconstruction period, particularly Black women, as they are being disenfranchised and excluded from political life and political participation, Black women actually took center stage in political life and actually worked closely with Black men who were enfranchised, who were given the right to vote. And they continuously fought together with Black people, and including children, to fight for freedom. But their conception of freedom was not wedded to that individual possession, idea of individual possession, but collective possession. And again, that goes straight against the liberal conception of freedom. And those are the ways in which I think that ethnic studies paradigm should be going. And I think that those are the kinds of ways in which we could collectively analyze and come up with different forms of knowledge. But anyway, so I'll end there. And I don't know where people are because I just lost myself. And okay, there you are. Cool. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Reach. Thank you for the presentation. For those that would like to share their reactions, do a thumbs up, or there's a little reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Also, this book right here, if you could see Black Abolitionists, you can learn a lot from what Dr. Urish was sharing from this book as well, in terms of how Benjamin Quarles was framing abolitionists, Black abolitionists. That's an important thing to read as well. We do have one more presentation, last but not least. Peng Young, welcome.
Thank you so much. Let me just turn this into presentation mode so that you can see my entire screen. My name is Peng. I am came to the United States after around 4 years old, after the fall of Laos to communism, where Hmong men and boys helped the CIA fight a secret war in Laos alongside the Vietnam War. As you can see, I have a number of different roles that I play within the school community as well. A lot of my classroom teaching revolves around my own personal background as an English learner throughout my elementary years, and then kind of figuring out who I was growing up in the St. Paul public school system, figuring out the racism that I was facing in the community, the gender role I played as a Hmong American daughter, and how I must maintain my heritage native language to be able to keep that with me. In addition, not having teachers of color who looked like me also played a huge role in why I do what I do in my classroom. What I hungered was for a place to be able to have conversation and to help me understand all the things that was going around me at that time. 25 years later, as my students put into the, as they put into the letters, students are still struggling with similar issues like family, love, identity, race, mental health, etc. And so a lot of our Hmong students today are still facing the same challenges that I face. So after 19 years of teaching ESL, I went into a new passion and took on Hmong language programming at my school. And knowing that Hmong is on the list of languages that will die out by the end of the century, there's so much work that needs to be done. I also linked here, I'll actually share this Google slide with you in the comment that you can, if you'd like to look into a recently published paper from the Coalition of Asian American Leaders in Education Evolving on heritage language programming, and also a presentation that I did with a couple colleagues earlier this summer. So like I said, we started our heritage language programming back in 2015, and after the success of the heritage Spanish program, Hmong was introduced. And this wasn't as easy as the Spanish because Hmong is not a language that is common, so it's a less commonly taught language. So students had to do a lot of advocacy work along with parents in the community to be able to get this program up and going. And so we are one of the newest heritage language program in the Twin Cities. And then after that, I also helped get started the Heritage Vietnamese program that will be gearing up in the next month here. And this will be the first of its kind in the state of Minnesota, as Brooklyn Park has one of the largest population of Vietnamese students. What we know about our heritage learners is that our system has stripped them away from their language and their heritage. And so looking at what they can't do. But really, we need to look at the assets that they bring into our classroom, what they have that is half full. And so helping them to become problem solvers with the issues that they are encountering in their community. So with our program, I forgot to mention that our Hmong 1, 2 are based upon literacy, but Hmong 3 is really all about ethnic studies. So we use the University of California, Berkeley, YPAR curriculum in the classroom to help students gain some valuable skills. So, when we often talk a lot about issues that are happening in the Hmong community, but what do we do with that? And so by Hmong 3, we have this course to help students talk about, to decide on an issue that's happening in the community and then investigate the issue and take action. And so students this year have had a number of different topics from Hmong boys and achievement to Hmong mental health to beauty standards to domestic violence in the Hmong community. So these are issues that students are tackling that they really care about and so forth. So we've had a really good positive year this year with our ethnic studies Hmong 3 course. And so at the end of the year, I had students take a survey, and this is what students said about the course, that it's really helped them tackle challenges in life that they're going to be coming across. It helped them with their confidence, and it helped them to become who they've always wanted to be. And this is the kind of result that I'm looking for, because this is what I wish I would have had many years ago when I was in high school, and I didn't get that. And so to be able to provide a space for our students, our Hmong youths, to learn their language and their culture, but then at the same time give them the tools to be successful, that is key to making our world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bang. And as we kind of go now into our wrap up, we're going to put a question up in the chat and ask people to engage that way and share out what resonated with you from today. And we look forward to having more time to really engage and share our voices and work together, build together in the future. But right now, I'll pass it on to Sarah Garten to give out some info.
Hey everybody, so hopefully everyone's feeling super excited from our kickoff today, but you probably are wondering, what next? How do I keep being involved in these really critical conversations and dialogues and just really building knowledge together? So today we are kicking off our application for our Ethnic Studies Mentorship Network. So check out the link in the chat. We're also going to be sending out an email afterward. This will also be on our website, so you can definitely share it out with anybody else that you think would be interested. So there's two different applications, but we think that most people today are probably interested in being mentees. But also, if you know of anybody who might want to be a mentor in the network, we're sharing that link too. So people who are practicing, right, like in the classroom as pedagogy specialists, folks who are based in the community, applying ethnic studies to their arts practice, or content knowledge experts, right? People who like can share some of this ethnic studies history, some of this, these different systems of knowledge that we really want to share through our network. Please pass that along to them too.
Mentors.
Oh, Brian, do you need something?
I said also youth mentors.
And yes, youth mentors. We want it to be an intergenerational network. Thanks for saying that. And that we really want to lift up the knowledge and experiences of youth. So yeah, teach the teacher, right? How can we co-create together? So really not just the binary of mentor-mentee. So application deadline, August 28th. So that's giving you a few weeks to fill it out. Ask us more questions if you want. And then we'll announce our cohort on September 14th. So hopefully that'll be, you know, like right after the school year starts, be a little bit of a boost to be excited for the rest of the year. And the idea is that this would be a school year long cohort. So starting in October, we will have every other month 2.5 hour long gatherings. So similar to this, we'll have speakers coming in, we'll have time for our cohort to be building together. And then every other month, we'll be pairing you to have one-on-one mentoring with someone that we think you would be a good fit with. So there's an expectation about 3 hours between every one of those gatherings. So hopefully next year, at the end of the year, we can share out with one another like what we have built throughout the year. But remember, this is just our pilot year. We're hoping that this will continue into the future, right? We're like building our network. We're building our connections to what we're already doing. So we're going to stay on the meeting for about 10 minutes after. So if you have more questions about any of that, please do stay on. But should I pass it on for our closing? I'm looking at Brian. Yes. Okay. So Rahel, will you please take us into our closing today? And thank you, everyone. So excited.
Yes. First of all, thank you all so much for allowing me to share this space with you. This was really amazing. And thanks to all y'all for having this commitment to
to this work, right? So to introduce myself, my name is Rahel Teka. I'm she, her, or they, them pronouns. I'm a writer, facilitator, and organizer currently based in Oakland, California, but I grew up in the Twin Cities. I migrated to the Twin Cities from Ethiopia when I was 5 years old. Went to school in St. Paul, went through the St. Paul school district, and then went to Roseville Area High School, went to Ross. Currently, I organize with my political home, Black Youth Project 100, BYP 100, which is a formation of Black 18 to 35-year-olds, organizing through a Black queer feminist lens, through transformative leadership development, direct action organizing, and political education. I know that I talk fast, so I'm very purposefully talking very slow so that I don't start rolling. And I currently also serve as the communication strategist for the Participatory Budgeting Project, which is a group, a national organization that helps communities really seize power of public funds and decide together how to fund their communities. So these are my worlds, right? And I spend a lot of time thinking about how we not only build narratives that are reflective of the communities that we want to live in, but also build narratives that are reflective of the people who are telling their stories, right? I think that there's a thing that comes up often in narrative shift and narrative and communications work of telling the stories that are untold. But really what we need to do is create avenues for folks to tell their own stories and make sure that we're ready to listen when that time comes, right? So in all of my work, this like deep need for ethnic studies has emerged. So I'm gonna tell you all a little story about ethnic studies. In my time as a young person, I went to Roseville Area High School over 10 years ago. But at Roz, there is a program called the Black History Month program, which was a student-led, student-organized club almost, right? Where we really held space and built a container together to learn, to grow, to research, to build narratives and framings together. But we didn't call it ethnic studies, right? We all just knew that there was a space for us to go, to learn together and to actually engage with one another in principled struggle in that learning, to agree and disagree and bring in our learnings that we weren't getting in school, and be able to share that with one another, and build this space. And ultimately this would culminate in a showcase in which we would be presenting to the full school every February. And in that space, we had a really fantastic staff person who really believed in the capacity of youth leadership and believed that the best thing and the best way to engage youth leadership was to create the container, be an advocate, and then get out of the way and let students really create what they are ready to create, right? So what's really important about this space is that we designed curriculum through that, and we're able to learn and sharpen in a way that expanded way past all of our time there. And this is a thing that continues and started before I was there and continued after I left. But it's also important to note that it was treated as adjunct, as peripheral. It was a thing that we all chose to do, and that we often had to advocate very hard to be allowed to do, to be not only like resourced and provided the space and provided support, but even just plainly allowed to gather and to learn and to sharpen in this way. But despite that, we were able, because of youth leadership, to do this work. And the importance of it cannot possibly be oversold. And I really believe, and I believe that you all are here because you believe that we can't afford to keep treating liberation work as peripheral, as extracurricular, that we actually need to make this the core of what we do and the core of our educations. And so I say all of this to ask you all to join me in a visioning exercise. So one of my favorite things about being able to be in space like this is to be able to do a little bit of time travel together, right? And be able to spend a little bit of time really putting into tangible terms our visions for the future. So if you all wouldn't mind joining me, let's go into the future together. So if you're able to plant your feet on the ground beneath you, please do. If not, just do whatever you need to do within your body to feel rooted to feel held on the earth. Pay some attention to your breath, not with an effort to change it or alter it, but just to notice. And as you're paying attention to your breath, start to think about the classrooms that you see in your future. Think about what a student's experience looks like when they see themselves reflected in curriculum. Feel that power in your shoulders. Feel that power in your tummy if that's where it's showing up. Do you feel that power in your neck? Do you find your head being held a little bit higher? Imagine a student being able to bring their full selves to their educational experience. What do you see? And feel free to drop in the chat anything that you see, anything that you're noticing that's the same or different as the classrooms that you've experienced in your past that have brought you to this moment and to this commitment. Somebody dropped confidence in the chat. What do other folks see in this future? Joy, yes, joy. And disruption, yes. And happiness, belonging. Please keep dropping those things in the chat. And then we're gonna pay attention to our breath once again and get ready to come back into a space together that's in the present, moving back out of the future. I saw productive struggle, not being afraid to make mistakes. Yes, that was so core to student-led and student-designed curriculum, right? Is students will show you that a mistake is not the end of a road. It's the beginning of some really amazing principled struggle, and that steel sharpens steel for real. Understanding, empathy, beauty, joy, enlightenment, BIPOC solidarity, yes, yes. All right, and I want folks to just take note of all of these futures that are being dropped into the chat. Yes, representing East Africa, always. Take note of all of these futures that are being dropped in the chat and really take stock of them, plant them as seeds in your mind, because in joining this space, a part of what y'all are joining is like a commitment to co-creating this future. And like each of these seeds that y'all have dropped is going to be a part of that future that y'all are committing to nourishing and building and creating, and know that rooting will always make that principled struggle feel like something that can be moved through. You know, I think that it's been pointed to a couple times that there's something deeply, deeply alienating in being taught a version of reality that doesn't match what you have known or what you understand is true. And then also being kind of excluded from that reality that is framed as success to you, right? It's incredibly alienating to feel like you don't not only belong, but exist in the version of the world that's being taught in your school. And so like, just a deep, deep well of gratitude to all of y'all for being here and for being committed to real transformational leadership and the fact that youth are leaders right now, and we have to invest in that.
Thank you so much, Rahel, for bringing us home. We're home now, and thank you everyone for being part of this and kicking off the ethnic studies cohort, this network, making a new home for ourselves and making the future. Like Sarah said, we're gonna stick around for like 10 minutes more if we need to, I guess, organizers answering questions and stuff, but that is our official end for the morning. yeah, 1,000 blessings to everybody. Thank you for coming out this morning, staying in this morning, all of it.